In the Roman Empire, fleeing captivity represented far more than personal rebellion, it constituted a direct assault on imperial authority itself. Enslaved women who attempted escape faced immediate and permanent marking through red-hot branding irons, transforming them into living symbols of defeat known as fugitivae, female runaways. This barbaric practice transcended mere punishment; it embodied calculated torture designed to humiliate, subjugate, and forever identify the defiant. The searing brand typically scorched the forehead, ensuring perpetual visibility. These cruel inscriptions frequently displayed FVG, abbreviated fugitive or complete phrases like TNOTE fugitive, translating to I possess you, runaway. Being designated a fugitiva meant becoming public property of shame. The scarring functioned as an alarm to fellow enslaved individuals, particularly women, who might contemplate liberation. Branded females were perceived not simply as chattel but as tainted chattel, eternally marked by disgrace. They could never again blend among free-born Roman society, regardless of attempted disguise. The molten metal had rendered its permanent verdict. Branding ceremonies occurred openly, supplemented by vocal degradation and physical beatings. The agony, though excruciating, paled beside the enduring mental and social wound. Women endured particularly devastating ramifications. Within Roman civilization, feminine beauty and virtue faced rigid control. Bearing a mutilating burn across the face meant expulsion from even the most basic feminine respectability. Sometimes the branding proceeded under physical restraint, the victim secured motionless while blazing metal scarred her flesh. Such scenes were neither unusual nor exceptional, they represented standard procedure. Roman jurisprudence showed no gender distinction in its brutality. Nevertheless, enslaved women carried distinct burdens, encompassing not only compulsory labor and vulnerability to violation, but retribution specifically targeting the silencing of both physical form and personal determination. The branding ritual extended far beyond the physical procedure itself. The ceremony frequently unfolded before other enslaved persons, establishing a performance of terror that reinforced the absolute dominance of the master class. The stench of charring skin, the tortured wails, and the spectacle of permanent mutilation were all calculated to instill dread and submission. For Romans, this transcended simple justice; it constituted social manipulation, engineered to preserve the precarious power balance that sustained their civilization. Within the merciless realm of Roman bondage, retribution served purposes beyond mere dominance; it functioned as demonstration. For women attempting flight, among the most conspicuous and humiliating penalties was being fettered at the entrance, ad iannuum, a custom employed to shame the captive and discourage others from defiance. This punishment carried profound symbolic weight in Roman culture. The primary doorway of a Roman domus, or residence, represented both physical and social boundary. Being shackled there meant integration into the household structure, not as an individual, but as a warning. It transformed the woman into a living monument of discipline. Positioned there, frequently exposed to severe weather and public scrutiny, she would be secured with iron restraints, sometimes to pillars or walls beside the entryway. This placement guaranteed maximum exposure. The communication was unmistakable: this awaits those who dare attempt escape. For enslaved women, the punishment carried multiple layers of humiliation. Romans maintained deeply gendered perspectives regarding honor and disgrace. A woman's exposure to public observation, especially while restrained or partially clothed, constituted violence in itself. The objective was not merely behavioral correction, but degradation. Additionally, chained women were frequently deprived of essential needs for extended periods. Records from Roman theatrical works and satire, including compositions by Plautus, reference slaves being denied sustenance or forced to endure humiliation for prolonged durations while restrained near doorways. Though presented comedically, these references mirror authentic social customs and are corroborated by archaeological discoveries of iron shackles found in domestic excavations. This was not isolated punishment, but one woven into the fabric of Roman daily existence. The psychological devastation of this punishment was immense. The chained woman became a perpetual reminder to other enslaved individuals of the consequences of rebellion. She was transformed from a person into an alert, her suffering made visible to all who passed. The entrance to the Roman home, typically a place of welcome and hospitality for free citizens, became a site of terror and degradation for the enslaved. The very architecture of Roman domestic life was thus weaponized against those who sought liberation. Within an empire constructed on hierarchy and public display, being transformed into an object at the threshold of private life ranked among the most psychologically devastating penalties. Chaining slaves at the gate represented punishment through visibility, designed to shatter the spirit, eliminate dignity, and discourage others through spectacle. It conveyed a silent message delivered in iron: no boundary could be violated without retribution. Among the most savage punishments inflicted upon enslaved women who attempted escape in ancient Rome was their forced participation in the arena. While the image of gladiators dominates contemporary understanding of Roman entertainment, the reality was more sinister. Rome also employed public execution and orchestrated violence as methods of punishment, control, and amusement. Escaped enslaved women, particularly those considered incorrigible or threatening to social stability, could be sentenced to perish in these public arenas, not as fighters, but as sacrificial victims. The punishment was typically executed under the legal decree of damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to wild beasts. This judicial sentence was reserved for serious offenses, including abandonment, theft, insurrection, or repeated flight. Enslaved individuals possessed no legal status, so actions like escape were viewed not only as criminal but revolutionary. Women who fled and were recaptured, especially repeat fugitives, could be delivered to the games as expendable bodies. These executions were not rapid. They were designed to entertain. Victims might be exposed defenseless to wild animals, bears, lions, leopards, often after being stripped and chained to the arena floor. Some were burned alive, or killed through elaborate recreations of mythological scenes. Others were forced to fight one another with inadequate weapons, purely for the crowd's amusement. They were not trained like gladiators, their deaths were predetermined, not competitive. For enslaved women, the cruelty was amplified by spectacle. They were exhibited in ways meant to humiliate. The Roman audience, desensitized by frequent executions, took pleasure in the suffering of those considered society's lowest. Female captives were sometimes cast as sacrificial figures or punished in themed performances, blurring the distinction between punishment and theater. The arena became a stage where the power of the Roman state was displayed through the destruction of human lives. The orchestration of these deaths revealed the sophisticated cruelty of Roman entertainment. Victims were often costumed to represent mythological figures or criminals from famous stories, their deaths scripted to match legendary punishments. The audience participated in these spectacles not as passive observers but as active participants in the machinery of state violence. Records from Roman historians such as Suetonius and Cassius Dio mention the presence of women in the arena, though they focus more often on elite women or female gladiators. Still, the use of enslaved women in executions is confirmed by legal documents and inscriptions. It is important to understand that for a Roman audience, this was not simply justice, it was prevention. The message was clear: the enslaved body belonged to the state and the master. An act of rebellion, like escape, could lead not only to death, but to the most humiliating and public form of erasure. These women were turned into warnings, silenced through blood and applause. In ancient Rome, the lash was not merely a tool of agony, it was an emblem of possession, authority, and control. For enslaved women who dared to escape, flogging was one of the most common and vicious forms of retribution. It served not just to inflict physical suffering but to obliterate defiance, both publicly and permanently. Roman law granted enslavers absolute dominion over the bodies of their slaves. Flight was considered a serious transgression, and flogging, often with a flagrum, a multi-thonged whip sometimes weighted with metal or bone, was a preferred method of revenge. The punishment could be delivered privately within the household's confines, or in more severe instances, publicly, where the agonized cries of the punished woman were intended to resonate louder than her attempt to flee. The number of strikes was not limited. No judicial intervention was required. Roman legal and moral texts made clear that an enslaver could punish a runaway as severely as they deemed appropriate. In practice, this meant unlimited brutality, especially if the flight had caused embarrassment or financial damage. For women, punishment often included not only physical abuse, but also intentional acts of public degradation designed to strip away personal dignity and identity. This punishment was not merely about pain. It was about making the enslaved woman a visible reminder to others of the consequences of disobedience. After flogging, the woman might be left in a state of collapse, with torn and bloodied clothing, deliberately displayed before the rest of the household, or, in extreme cases, in communal areas such as markets or workshops where other enslaved people could witness the result. The instruments of punishment were engineered to maximize suffering. The flagrum, with its multiple leather thongs often embedded with pieces of metal, bone, or pottery, was designed to tear flesh from bone. Each stroke was calculated to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim alive to endure more. The psychological trauma of anticipating each blow was as devastating as the physical pain itself. The ritual of flogging often included verbal abuse and humiliation, transforming the punishment into a comprehensive assault on the victim's humanity. Enslavers would sometimes invite other household members to witness the beating, creating a community of complicity that reinforced the power structures that sustained the institution of slavery. Flogging was not only tolerated, it was expected as part of the process of correcting behavior. A woman who had attempted escape was viewed not just as a criminal, but as a disruption to the order of the domus. Her punishment had to reassert the enslaver's absolute control. In Roman literature and satire, beatings are casually referenced. This normalization speaks volumes. Writers such as Horace, Juvenal, and Petronius mention flogging in everyday terms, reflecting a society in which brutal physical punishment was neither rare nor questioned. While their works are fictional or exaggerated, they mirror a world where cruelty was embedded in the structure of enslavement. In some cases, flogging was a prelude to further punishment, branding, chaining, or forced labor. It was not always the conclusion. But the lash, above all, was the instrument of choice to express immediate, unrestrained authority. Among the most dreaded punishments in the Roman Empire was banishment to the mines. For enslaved women who attempted to flee, this penalty was not merely corrective, it was effectively a gradual execution, carried out through forced labor under deadly conditions. While men were more commonly sent to quarries and mines, enslaved women were not spared, especially if their escape was seen as repeated or rebellious. The punishment of damnatio in metallum, condemnation to the mines, was legally established and considered one of the most severe forms of penal servitude. It was typically reserved for those who had committed grave crimes, including desertion, theft, or in the case of slaves, repeated flight. Mines in Roman provinces such as Noricum, Dacia, and Sardinia were infamous for their lethal working environments. The air was suffocated with dust, ventilation was virtually non-existent, and collapse was a perpetual threat. Enslaved laborers toiled in cramped shafts, performing backbreaking work with primitive tools, exposed to toxic elements such as mercury and lead. For women, the experience was particularly horrific. They were subjected to the same exhausting tasks as men, hauling stones, crushing ore, and clearing debris. But with additional vulnerabilities. Abuse by guards and overseers was widespread, and there was no oversight, no protection, and no return. The sentence to the mines was almost always permanent. Few survived long enough to be freed. Death from exhaustion, starvation, or injuries was commonplace. There are records of enslaved people being chained together, kept underground for days, and beaten if they slowed their pace. Enslaved women, if pregnant, were not exempted. Some gave birth in the mines, only for their infants to die shortly after from exposure or neglect. The conditions in the mines were deliberately designed to break both body and spirit. Workers were often chained together, preventing any possibility of escape or rest. The darkness was complete, broken only by the flickering light of oil lamps that provided barely enough illumination to navigate the treacherous passages. The heat was oppressive, and the air was thick with dust and toxic fumes that slowly poisoned those who breathed it. The psychological warfare of mine work was as devastating as the physical hardships. Workers were stripped of their names, their identities, and their hope. They became numbers in an accounting ledger, their lives measured only in terms of the ore they could extract before death claimed them. Unlike more visible punishments such as flogging or branding, deportation to the mines was deliberately concealed from public view. It was punishment through erasure. A fugitive woman sent to the mines was not meant to be seen again. Her suffering occurred in darkness, far from the gaze of the city, but was no less real. If anything, it was more complete. The punishments Rome imposed on fugitive enslaved women, branding, public chaining, the arena, the scourge, and the mines, revealed an empire willing to sacrifice human dignity to preserve its social order. These acts reshaped power by broadcasting terror, reminding us that the architecture of domination rests on visible pain. Each punishment was carefully calculated not just to punish the individual, but to send a message to all who might consider resistance. The systematic nature of these punishments reveals the deep anxiety that lay at the heart of Roman society. Despite their overwhelming military power and sophisticated legal systems, the Romans lived in constant fear of rebellion from those they enslaved. The elaborate cruelty of their punishments was both a symptom of this fear and an attempt to control it through terror. These methods of control were not random acts of sadism but carefully constructed tools of social engineering. They were designed to create a climate of fear so pervasive that the mere thought of resistance would be crushed before it could take root. The public nature of many of these punishments ensured that their message would spread far beyond their immediate victims. History is no relic, its echoes persist wherever coercion still seeks to silence freedom. The methods may have evolved, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Those in power will go to extraordinary lengths to maintain their position, often through the infliction of suffering on those who dare to challenge them. Understanding these historical precedents is crucial for recognizing similar patterns in our own time and for developing strategies to resist them. As Seneca cautioned, servi sunt immo homines. They are slaves. No, they are human beings.